The courtroom was supposed to be silent, orderly, controlled, predictable. But on this day, it felt like a battlefield. A sudden shout echoed across the room. People gasped. Papers scattered across the floor. Security rushed forward as the judge slammed the gavel, demanding silence. But no one was listening anymore. An innocent man stood at the center, shaking, eyes filled with fear. His future was seconds away from being destroyed. Across the room, powerful lawyers whispered confidently. The verdict already felt decided. The system had already chosen a side. Then, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every head turned. A man slowly stood up from the back row, calm, unshaken, unimpressed by the authority in the room. While everyone else panicked, he remained still, like the chaos meant nothing to him. The judge demanded he sit down. The lawyers mocked him. Security moved closer. But he didn't move, because this wasn't just another trial. This was a moment where justice was about to fail, and someone had decided to stop it. No one in that courtroom knew it yet, but they were about to witness the moment Chuck Norris refused to let an innocent person be destroyed. And what happened next shocked the entire courtroom. The trial moved forward, but it didn't feel like a search for truth. It felt like a performance already scripted. The prosecutor rose from his seat with a smug expression, adjusting his tie like a man who already knew he would win. His voice carried confidence, power, and a hint of cruelty. He began tearing into the accused. Every word was designed to humiliate, not just question. Every sentence twisted facts into lies. Every pause was meant to make the innocent man look guilty. The accused tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He explained himself. He denied the charges. He begged the court to listen. But the prosecutor interrupted constantly, laughing under his breath, treating the man like he wasn't even human. The judge watched and did nothing. In fact, the judge sided with the prosecutor repeatedly. Objections were overruled unfairly. Evidence that could help the defense was dismissed without proper review. The balance of justice was clearly broken, and everyone in the courtroom could feel it. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Some whispered to each other. Some clenched their fists in frustration. But no one spoke up. Fear kept them silent. The innocent man's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the witness stand. His breathing became shallow. Sweat rolled down his forehead as he realized the system had already decided his fate. Then the prosecutor leaned closer. He accused the man of being a liar, a criminal, a danger to society. The words hit like punches. The accused voice cracked again. This time, he couldn't finish his sentence. Emotion overwhelmed him. Years of fear, stress, and helplessness poured out in a silent breakdown. And still, the courtroom stayed quiet. Except for one person. Chuck Norris sat in the back row, silent but fully aware. His eyes followed every lie, every unfair ruling, every moment of cruelty. He didn't react with anger. He didn't shout. He didn't move. But his jaw tightened. There was a tension about him, controlled, disciplined, dangerous, like a storm building quietly before it explodes. He wasn't just watching a trial. He was watching justice being dismantled piece by piece. The prosecutor continued, pushing harder, enjoying his power. "This man," he said, pointing at the accused, "does not deserve mercy. He deserves punishment." The accused lowered his head, defeated. The courtroom felt heavy, like the outcome was inevitable. And yet, Chuck Norris remained still. Not because he didn't care, but because he was waiting, observing, calculating, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the exact second when silence would no longer be acceptable. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from? The pressure inside the courtroom kept rising, like a wire stretched to its breaking point. The prosecutor called for the final phase of questioning, the moment meant to crush the accused completely. The innocent man stood at the witness stand, shoulders slumped, eyes red from holding back tears. Every breath he took looked like a struggle. The weight of the accusations pressed on him like a mountain. "This is your last chance," the prosecutor said coldly. "Tell the truth or accept the consequences." The man tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. His voice trembled. His lips shook. He looked toward the judge, hoping for fairness. But the judge's expression remained distant, almost bored. The defense attorney attempted to object. Overruled, the judge snapped instantly. Again and again. The message was clear. This courtroom was no longer about justice. It was about control. The prosecutor leaned forward, voice growing sharper. You expect this court to believe you? You expect mercy after what you've done? You expect us to trust a man like you? Each sentence struck harder than the last. The accused finally broke. His hands started shaking uncontrollably. His knees weakened. Tears rolled down his face as he whispered, barely audible, "I didn't do it." But the courtroom barely reacted. Some people felt sympathy. Others looked uncomfortable. Most stayed silent. The system had already decided his fate. Then, a calm voice cut through the tension. Enough. The word wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But it carried a weight that instantly changed the atmosphere. Everyone turned. Chuck Norris had finally spoken. He stood slowly, posture relaxed yet commanding. His eyes locked onto the prosecutor, not with anger, but with certainty. "This man hasn't been given a fair chance to speak," Chuck said evenly. "You're not seeking truth. You're trying to break him." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. The judge slammed the gavel. "Sit down. You are out of order." Chuck didn't sit. Instead, he took a step forward. "I won't sit while an innocent person is being crushed," he replied calmly. The prosecutor scoffed. "Who do you think you are?" Chuck looked at him without blinking. "Someone who doesn't stay silent when justice is being abused." The tension spiked instantly. Security shifted closer. The judge's face flushed with anger. The crowd leaned forward in shock. "Remove him if he speaks again," the judge warned. Chuck nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the threat and ignoring it completely. The prosecutor resumed his attack, now more aggressive than before. He twisted evidence. He exaggerated details. He painted the accused as a monster. Chuck watched closely. Then he spoke again, calmly, deliberately. "You're misrepresenting the facts." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged the gavel harder. "One more word, and you will be removed." Chuck paused, not in fear, but in control. If you were in Chuck's place, would you stay silent and follow the rules, or stand up against injustice, even if it put you in danger? He looked at the accused, whose eyes were filled with desperation. Then Chuck turned back to the judge. "If speaking the truth gets me removed," he said quietly, "then this court has already failed." The silence that followed was heavy. The crowd could feel it. Something had shifted. This was no longer just a trial. This was becoming a confrontation between power and principle. The prosecutor snapped. "This man is disrupting the court. He has no authority here." Chuck responded calmly. "Neither does corruption." The word corruption hit like a lightning strike. The judge stood up in fury. "That's it. Security." Two officers stepped forward. The room buzzed with tension. Phones discreetly lifted. People whispered, sensing something historic unfolding. Chuck remained still, not threatening, not violent, but absolutely unmovable. The accused looked at him with disbelief, like someone had finally chosen to stand beside him. The prosecutor sneered. "You're risking everything for someone you don't even know." Chuck glanced at the innocent man. Then he replied, "Justice isn't about who you know. It's about who deserves protection." The tension reached a breaking point. Everyone could feel it, the moment before something explodes. Would you stay quiet in this situation, or stand up even if it got you in trouble? The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Security hovered closer to Chuck Norris, waiting for the judge's final command. The prosecutor smirked, confident that the interruption would soon be silenced. The accused stood frozen, unsure whether to feel hope or fear. But Chuck didn't back down. Instead of raising his voice, he lowered it. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "if this court truly seeks justice, then let's focus on facts, not intimidation." The judge hesitated for a split second. That hesitation mattered. The prosecutor quickly stepped in. "This is outrageous. He has no role in this trial." Chuck turned slightly, eyes sharp. "Then why are you afraid of what I'm about to say?" A murmur rippled through the room. Chuck began walking slowly toward the center, not like a rebel, but like someone who already belonged there. You claim the accused was at the crime scene at 9:14 p.m., Chuck said, looking at the prosecutor. But your own submitted timeline shows a phone record placing him miles away at 9:10 p.m. The prosecutor's smile tightened. Chuck continued, calm and precise. You dismissed the defense's witness because of a so-called inconsistency, yet you ignored 3 inconsistencies in your own key witness's statement. He turned toward the jury. This isn't evidence. This is selective storytelling. The courtroom stirred. People started whispering. Some jurors leaned forward. Even the judge looked uneasy. The prosecutor snapped back. You're twisting facts. Chuck shook his head slightly. No, I'm untwisting yours. A quiet shock traveled through the audience. Chuck pointed to the accused, who stood trembling. You've portrayed this man as a criminal, but you never explained his motive. Because there isn't one. The accused looked up, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time. Chuck turned toward the judge. If this court allows intimidation, misrepresentation, and bias to decide a verdict, then this isn't a courtroom. It's a performance. Silence fell. The judge clenched his jaw, but he didn't interrupt. The prosecutor, losing control, called out, Your Honor, this is improper. Remove him. But before the judge could speak, Chuck revealed the twist. There's something else you didn't mention, Chuck said. He looked directly at the prosecutor. You conveniently ignored a security camera near the scene. A ripple of shock ran through the courtroom. The prosecutor froze for a fraction of a second, long enough for everyone to notice. Chuck continued. That footage wasn't lost. It wasn't damaged. It was never submitted. Gasps erupted. The defense attorney jumped to his feet. What footage? Chuck kept his voice steady. The footage that contradicts the entire accusation. The prosecutor's face hardened. That's speculation. Chuck replied instantly. Then explain why your office requested the footage, and then buried it. The room erupted into whispers. Jurors exchanged stunned glances. The audience leaned forward. Phones discreetly began recording. The judge slammed the gavel. Order. Order. But the energy had already shifted. For the first time in the trial, the prosecutor looked uncertain. Chuck took a breath. Not dramatic, just controlled. This trial started with power on one side and silence on the other, he said. But silence ends now. He turned to the jury. You've been shown a story designed to make you afraid. But fear isn't proof. Then to the accused. You're not alone anymore. The man's eyes filled with tears, but this time, not from despair. The prosecutor lashed out. You're manipulating the courtroom. Chuck responded calmly. No, you were manipulating it. I'm correcting it. The crowd began shifting emotionally. No longer passive observers, but witnesses to a turning tide. Even the judge's authority seemed to weaken. A clerk hurried toward the judge and whispered something urgently. The judge's expression changed. He cleared his throat. The court will allow the defense to review the previously unsubmitted footage, he announced reluctantly. A shock wave passed through the room. The prosecutor slammed his folder shut in frustration. Chuck stepped back slightly, not in retreat, but in confidence. The balance of power had shifted. Moments ago, the accused looked doomed. Now, the truth had a doorway. Chuck glanced briefly at the man and gave a subtle nod, a silent message. Hold on. Justice is waking up. The courtroom buzzed with tension, but this time, it wasn't hopeless tension. It was anticipation, because everyone could feel it. The story the prosecutor controlled was falling apart, and the real story was finally beginning to rise. The courtroom, once controlled and predictable, now felt like a pressure chamber seconds away from exploding. The revelation about the hidden security footage had cracked the foundation of the prosecution's case, and everyone could feel it. The prosecutor's confidence shattered. His voice grew louder, sharper, desperate. This is a distraction, he snapped. A cheap trick to confuse the jury. But the words no longer carried the same power. Jurors whispered among themselves. Spectators leaned forward, sensing the collapse of something corrupt. The accused clutched the witness stand, hope finally taking root in his trembling hands. Then the prosecutor's tone shifted, from aggressive to threatening. He turned toward Chuck Norris. You've already disrupted this court enough, he said coldly. You should be careful who you challenge. The implication hung in the air. Not just a legal threat, a personal one. Security officers moved closer, hands hovering near their equipment. The judge looked uneasy, torn between authority and fear of losing control. Chuck remained still, unshaken, unintimidated. He stepped forward slightly, eyes steady. You're not afraid of disorder, Chuck said quietly. You're afraid of exposure. The prosecutor slammed his hand on the table. Your Honor, this man is interfering with legal proceedings. Remove him immediately. Security advanced another step. The accused looked terrified, afraid that the one person standing for him was about to be silenced.
Do you think justice should always be peaceful, or are there moments where taking a stand, even physically, becomes necessary?
But Chuck raised a hand, calm, controlled. If standing up for what's right gets me removed, he said, then I'll leave knowing I didn't stay silent. The room fell silent. Every ear listened. Every eye watched. Chuck turned to face the courtroom. Not like a fighter, but like a man making a moral stand. This case isn't just about one innocent person, he said. It's about whether power can bully truth into submission. He gestured toward the accused. This man has been humiliated, threatened, painted as a villain without real proof. Then he turned toward the prosecutor and the judge. And you allowed it. The judge shifted uncomfortably. Chuck continued, voice calm but powerful. Justice doesn't exist to protect reputations. It exists to protect people. The prosecutor scoffed, trying to regain control. You think you're some kind of hero? Chuck replied evenly. No, I'm just someone who refuses to look away. Suddenly, a court officer rushed toward the judge and whispered urgently. The judge's face paled. The prosecutor noticed, and panic flashed in his eyes. What is this? He demanded. Before the judge could answer, a courtroom staff member hurried in holding an envelope, visibly shaken. Your Honor, this just arrived, the staffer said nervously. The envelope was handed to the judge. Inside were documents, printed records, emails, transaction logs. The judge flipped through them, his expression darkening. These documents suggest, he paused, choosing his words carefully, that evidence may have been deliberately withheld. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor's voice rose sharply. This is nonsense. Chuck stepped forward. You knew the evidence could expose your case, he said calmly. So you buried it. The prosecutor glared. You have no proof. Chuck nodded toward the envelope. You're looking at it. Tension surged like electricity. The prosecutor snapped, his control breaking. He pointed at Chuck. This man is sabotaging the system. He should be arrested. Security officers hesitated, unsure who actually held authority anymore. The courtroom felt seconds away from chaos. The accused suddenly stood up, voice shaking. Please, don't let them silence him, he said. He's the only one who believes me. The raw emotion in his voice hit the entire room. Chuck turned toward him. You're not fighting alone anymore, he said quietly. Then Chuck addressed everyone, judge, jury, audience. There comes a moment when silence becomes a crime, he said. When watching injustice makes you part of it. His voice deepened. This is that moment. The tension peaked. The corrupt side realized they were losing control, and they didn't plan to lose quietly. A senior court officer leaned toward the prosecutor and whispered urgently. The prosecutor's face hardened. He whispered back. A silent decision was made. Security tightened their formation. The atmosphere turned darker, more dangerous. Chuck noticed instantly. You can try to intimidate me, he said. You can threaten me. You can try to remove me. He paused. But you can't remove the truth. The room buzzed with adrenaline. Everyone sensed what was coming next. This was no longer just a legal battle. It was becoming a direct confrontation between corruption and courage. And the corrupt side was about to make a desperate move. A move that would push this courtroom from heated argument into open conflict. The moment the corrupt side realized they were losing control, everything snapped. A loud argument erupted near the prosecutor's table. Security officers suddenly moved forward, not just to maintain order, but to silence the disruption. The courtroom descended into chaos. People stood up. Voices clashed. The judge slammed the gavel repeatedly, but the sound was drowned by rising panic. Then it happened. One of the officers lunged toward Chuck Norris, attempting to force him away. Chuck reacted instantly, not with rage, not with aggression, but with calm, controlled precision. He stepped aside, redirecting the officer's grip without harming him, just enough to protect himself and the accused. Another officer rushed in, and Chuck blocked the advance, placing himself between them and the innocent man. "Back away," Chuck said firmly. "This man is under threat." The crowd gasped as tension exploded into movement. The prosecutor shouted, "Arrest him, now!" But before anyone could comply, a court clerk shouted from the back of the room, "Stop! There's new evidence." Everyone froze. The clerk rushed forward, holding a digital tablet and a sealed flash drive. "This was just delivered," she said breathlessly. "Security footage from the night of the incident." All eyes turned. The judge ordered immediate playback. The courtroom screens lit up. The footage began rolling. The room fell into a stunned silence. The video showed the crime scene, but not the story the prosecutor had been selling. Instead, it revealed something shocking. The accused was not committing the crime. He was trying to stop it. Then a familiar figure appeared on the screen, someone close to the case. A corrupt associate, a hidden accomplice, someone tied directly to the prosecutor's network. Gasps erupted. The prosecutor's face drained of color. Chuck turned slowly toward him. "You didn't just twist evidence," Chuck said quietly. "You built a false story." The prosecutor backed away. This is manipulated," he shouted desperately. But then another revelation appeared. Time-stamped messages, financial transfers, private communications, all linking the prosecutor and certain court officials to a cover-up. The courtroom erupted. People shouted. Jurors looked furious. Reporters raised cameras. The judge stared at the evidence in disbelief. "You knowingly prosecuted an innocent man," the judge said coldly. The prosecutor panicked. He turned to leave. Then he ran. Security moved to stop him, but he shoved one officer aside. That was the final spark. The room burst into motion again. Chuck moved fast. He intercepted the prosecutor before he reached the exit, blocking his escape without throwing a punch, just stopping him with controlled strength. "Running only proves your guilt," Chuck said. More officers arrived, this time to arrest the right person. As the prosecutor was restrained, he shouted desperately, "This system is broken. Everyone does this." Chuck looked at him. "Not everyone," he replied. "That's why you're losing." The accused collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face. He was no longer a criminal in the public eye. He was a victim of corruption. The courtroom slowly calmed. The chaos faded into stunned silence. Everyone looked toward Chuck, the man who had refused to stay silent, who had protected the innocent, who had forced the truth into the light. The judge took a deep breath. "This court recognizes that a grave injustice nearly occurred," he announced. "The charges against the accused are hereby suspended pending full investigation." Relief swept across the room. The accused looked at Chuck with gratitude and disbelief. "You saved my life," he whispered. Chuck shook his head slightly. "The truth saved you," he said. "I just refused to let it stay buried." The courtroom felt different now. Not tense, not corrupt, but awakened. Because everyone had just witnessed something rare. A system exposed, a lie destroyed, and justice fighting its way back to the surface. Should justice always be peaceful? Or are there moments where someone must stand and fight? The courtroom slowly returned to silence, but it was no longer the heavy, hopeless silence from before. This time, it was a silence filled with respect. The accused sat quietly, hands shaking, not from fear anymore, but from emotional release. The nightmare that nearly destroyed his life was finally unraveling. The judge stood, posture straighter than before. Based on the evidence revealed today, he said firmly, "This court acknowledges that the accused was wrongfully targeted. All charges are hereby dismissed." A wave of relief spread across the room. Some people sighed. Others nodded in approval. A few even wiped tears from their eyes. The innocent man covered his face for a moment, overwhelmed. Then he stood and turned toward Chuck Norris. "I don't even know how to thank you," he said, voice trembling. "Everyone gave up on me, except you." Chuck met his gaze calmly. "You didn't need someone to save you," Chuck replied. "You needed someone to make sure the truth was heard." The man nodded, tears falling freely now, but they were tears of gratitude, not fear. Nearby, officials escorted the corrupt prosecutor away in handcuffs. The whispers that followed were no longer filled with arrogance. They were filled with shock, regret, and reflection. An investigation into the court officials involved in the cover-up was announced immediately. The message was clear. Corruption would no longer be ignored. The judge turned toward Chuck. "Mr. Norris," he said respectfully, "your actions today forced this court to confront its own failures." Chuck gave a small nod. "I didn't come here to challenge the court," he said. "I came to challenge injustice." The jury members looked at him with admiration. Some spectators quietly applauded. Even the officers who had once been ordered to remove him now stood with renewed respect. The atmosphere had completely transformed. What began as a rigged trial had become a moment of accountability. As people began to leave, reporters rushed forward, trying to capture statements, reactions, and sound bites. "Why did you get involved?" one asked. "Aren't you afraid of the consequences?" another shouted. Chuck paused near the exit and turned slightly. "Because staying silent would have been easier," he said calmly. But silence never fixed injustice. Then he walked away. No celebration, no victory pose, no need for recognition, just quiet dignity. The accused watched him leave, realizing he had just witnessed something rare. Not just strength, but principle. Later, news headlines spread across the city. Wrongful conviction stopped, corruption exposed in courtroom. Man who refused to stay, silent forces justice. But Chuck never commented. For him, the real reward wasn't attention. It was knowing an innocent life had been saved. The courtroom itself felt different afterward. More cautious, more accountable, more aware that justice must be protected, not assumed. And in the minds of everyone who witnessed that day, one truth remained clear. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's calm. Sometimes it's quiet. But sometimes it stands up when no one else will. More powerful stories like this are coming soon. Stories about courage, justice, and standing up when it matters most. Tell us in the comments which part of this story hit you the hardest, so we can make the next one even better. And remember, real strength isn't just about power. It's about standing for what's right.